Hello everyone, welcome back to BIOL1309 Evolutionary Diversity. And today we are finally going to talk about angiosperms, which is the flowering plant. After the long journey of talking through from algae to ferns and to seeded plants, naked seed plants, we're finally going to talk about flowering plants. So, this beginning part is a bit boring. Flower plants are everywhere. Trees and all those jacks. I'm not gonna go for that. Okay, so flowering plants, they are the most successful taxonomic groups of the plants. Okay, so compared to all the the previous conifers and such, they're not as successful as flowering plants, even though they are quite successful already. They dominated the plants at around more than 100 million years ago, with 300,000 to 450,000 species. They're diverse in vegetative, so how they grow, different morphology, as well as reproductive structures. So you will see later the flowers and the seeds take on many different shapes, as well as habitats. So they can grow in the forest, desert, arid areas, or coastal areas. The most important evolutionary answers are things that are related to reproduction. So flowers that are actually sporophylls. I'm sure you are very familiar with what that means. Carpels, which are floral structures that enclose the ovule. I'll show you later. And fruits, which I don't think this video will talk about because I don't think Cleve reached that part yet. But actually no. Cleve talked about like apples, but this video will be mostly about flowers. All right, a bit of a housekeeping, some basic concepts out of the way first. First off, uh, flowering plants are split into two types. One is dicot and one is monocot. Um, the name actually come from the cot, just comes from going. The cot's name comes from cotyledons, so you'll see. So dicots, flower parts or petals usually comes in 4 or 5 petals. So in this plant, I think there is maybe 4 petals, but for monocots, it's usually in threes. So 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3. So this flower has 6, which is a 3 times 2, and pollens. So the major difference between dicot pollens and monocot pollens are their the number of apertures they have. Apertures or furrows, you can think of them as weak points on the pollen wall. That that is where the pollen tube will germinate from when it reaches an ovule. So for dicots, there are 3. So 1, 2, 3, that's where the pollen tubes can germinate. But for monocots, it's only one. Right, only one weak spot. Now, this is the where the name comes from, the cot. So for dicots, obviously they have 2 cotyledons, which are in this case act as like food storage. This is a bean dicot with 2 cotyledons. And for wheat monocot, um, the cotyledon is here, which is just surrounding the embryo, but the rest of the food storage is actually by the endosperm, which is 3N, which is triploid. As I mentioned before, um, sometimes the food storage is actually 2N, sometimes it could be 1N, and sometimes in this case it could be 3N. Alright, this is the main key difference. Well, it's named cotyledons. Alright, moving on. So dicot plants, they have a net-like leaf venation. It's a very dense set of network with a net-like structure. But monocots, they're all parallel. So when you look at a leaf, if you see all the veins are going in the same direction, parallel, it's a monocot. But if it's a net-like, it's a dicot. All right, for primary vascular bundles and stems, if you remember, this is this with the xylem being the inside and the phloem being on the outside. This is ectofluoric siphonostele, but in this case, that's not the main point. So for dicots, it's usually organized in a ring. while for monocots, main, it's usually scattered. These two do not have like separate names. It's just ring structure or scattered arrangement. So it's not like ectofluoric siphonophile. It's none of that nonsense. All right, moving on. So, I believe last video or last video, I talked about secondary growth. That is the thickening of the stem for the growth of secondary xylem and phloem. For dicots, it's usually present. You see, that's why trees are really thick. But for monocots, it's typically absent. So this is a palm, or you can think of like a coconut tree. You can see comparatively the stem, the main stem. This one is way thinner, and this one is a lot thicker. So it also leads to monocots typically being less sort of strong in that they do not have as much maybe like xylem. They don't really. I don't think they have that much secondary xylem to help support the plant. So they they can resist less force. They're just weaker in general. And also, I think this is a good time to talk about, if you remember last video, where I talked about Nyctophyta, the final naked seed phylum. So for that phylum, actually, um, they both have xylem members and tracheids. For their no, for the xylem, they both have vessel members and tracheids, which means they coexist together. And this is the same for angiosperms as well. So angiosperms have vessel members and tracheids as well. All right. So aside from that, we have the roots. For dicots, you have something called a taproot, which is kind of the main sort of main root going off of the plant, and with a lot of lateral roots going on the side. But for monocots, like this grass, there's only fibrous roots. There is no central root present. There's only just fibrous roots that just goes everywhere. All right. So after talking about the most basic of characteristics, we're gonna talk about the flowers. So there are four rows of flower parts. Just think of that as different layers. So four layers, and each layer is one kind. So from the outside, the outermost part is the sepal, which is this green part in some cases, and another is the petal, which is usually the more colorful parts. And then third, stamen, which is the male reproductive parts, anther and filament, and finally carpel, which is the stigma, style, and ovary. These are the female parts. Now, there is something called the perianth, which is the petal and the sepal, this and this. Sometimes they are really morphologically very similar, and you cannot distinguish them by like looking at them, but you'll be able to like distinguish them when you look at it layer by layer. So appendages and each hurl could be free, so it could be like independent or fused. So these petals could either be having like independent from one another, or it could be fused, so free to becoming one. And then flowers may be complete with all of these structures, or incomplete, so don't have those structures. They could be perfect, which means they are bisexual, or imperfect, which means unisexual. There's also one sentence which is hold on, which is complete flowers are always bisexual or always perfect, but perfect flowers, so bisexual flowers, are not always complete. Take that in. Um, what that means is that all flowers that are complete must be bisexual, but bisexual flowers may not be complete, and they may not have all the flower parts. I think I could give you like some idea for that. So if it's like imperfect unisexual, that means it either has the filament or the carpel, or the carpel. Yeah, It either has like the stamens or the carpel. So if it's imperfect, one of these structures will be lacking. But for like complete or actually yeah, for bisexual flowers, both structure will be present. But it could mean that the petal and the sepal may not be there. Okay, right, good. So first we'll talk about the stamen. The stamen or the androethium, which is actually the collective term for all stamens for a flower, and two components. So anther, which is this part, and the filament, which is the stem. I didn't get that wrong. Phew. All right. So if you dissect or cut open a anther, it will show this sort of like a moth shape. Now, this part here is the microsporangium, and inside it are the microsporocytes. So, anther is actually a modified microsporophyll with microsporangiums, and well, the microsporocytes will undergo meiosis to produce microspores. And if you remember, the microspores will develop into pollen grains, and the pollen grains inside that will have a partially developed male gametophyte to produce the sperms. Alright, moving on to carpel. This entire thing is the carpel, and the carpel is a modified megasporophyll. So this is actually a megasporophyll with megasporangium inside the ovary. This is the ovary, and inside is the ovules, and the megasporangium are inside the ovules. Three components: stigma, this part, the upper part, which is where the plant would usually receive the pollen, and the style is kind of, I believe, either the pollen will be transported down here or the pollen tube will germinate and push the sperm to here, and ovary is just containing the ovules and the rest of the stuff. Okay, so now we will talk about the ovary arrangements, the position for the ovary. There is the superior ovary. So, superior ovary just means that it is above the receptacle. The receptacle, you can think of it as like a base of the flower, and the ovary is just above it, so it's superior ovary. And then half inferior ovary, it means that the ovary is half embedded into the hypanthium, which you can think is a modified receptacle. Although it's half embedded in, it's not completely sealed, so there is, you can see some space around it. That's half inferior. And finally, inferior just means that it's completely sealed. There is no, it cannot, there's no space around it. All right, this could be a bit tricky for me to explain, but I'll try my best. So there are, each flowers may contain a single ovary, and one carpel. So one carpel. This entire structure is one carpel, and this part is the ovary. And it could be, it could also have separate ovaries, so 1, 2, 3 ovaries, and separate carpels, so 1 carpel, 2 carpel, 3 carpel. And finally, it could have one single ovary, which is this entire structure, with 1, 2, 3, which is one ovary, but multiple carpels or styles. So there's still actually just like 1, 2, 3 carpels. So one carpel over here, one carpel over here, one carpel over here, but they're fused. And styles, which is these top bits, they are fused or separated, but in this case it's separated. Alright? Alright, so yeah. Okay, so the ovary will contain the ovules, and the arrangement of the ovule attachment is inside the ovary is called the placentation. It is kinda like how the embryo attaches into the uterine lining in humans. That is a paraphrase for what Cleve said. Okay, so ovule placentations can come in many different forms. One is called marginal, which is just a single carpel. So the stigma and style, and as well as the ovary, is one thing, and the ovules are arranged like this. And for axil, this is three fused carpel, but still one single ovary, and the ovules are here. These nubby things, they are the ovules. For parental, it's still three fused carpel, but the ovules are here on the side. And finally, free central means the ovules are in the center but without the separate walls here. And in these images, they actually, I believe, place presentations in fruits. So these are kind of like when you see the seed in the fruit, but they have the same arrangements when they're as a ovule and in fruit. Okay. All right. So moving on, we have inflorescence. There are clusters of flowers arranged in a specific manner. This is quite easy to understand. They don't really. It's not special. Okay. So now we talk about inflorescence with beautiful, colorful bracts. An example for this is the genus Bougainvillea. Bougainvillea. The bracts are actually modified leaves associated with flowers. So you can see in this genus, the flowers are the white little these are the flowers, the white parts, and the bracts, the purple pinkish leaves, they are surrounding it, and you could say they kind of help make the flower or the entire plant more attractive to insects, which will then help pollination for the plant. And actually, there's another plant that is you're probably quite familiar with, which is a Christmas plant, which is like Fa, which also works in the same way. The red parts, they're bracts, they're not flowers. Okay, and then we have okay. So sometimes you might see like the sunflower or the calla lily. You might think, oh look, this is like one big single flower, right? No, they are not one big single flowers. They are many different little flowers made up into one inflorescence. All right, inflorescence. All right, so let's talk about the sunflower first. The sunflower, you can see, it's made out of two different really small flower or floret. You have the disc florets in the middle here, and the ray florets. So for the disc floret, they have stigma and style, anther, and ovary. This means they are bisexual. They have two. They have both the male reproductive and female reproductive parts, and they have five fused petals here. As for the ray floret, they only have ovaries. That means they are only unisexual, and they don't even have stigma or style. So I'm not sure how will the ovule or the egg inside be fertilized. I'm not too sure. And yeah, so the ray florets have this ligule, which is the giant petal-like structure. They have three or five fused petals. So for other plants in the sunflower family of Asteraceae, I'm not sure how to read it. They have the thistle inflorescence, where all of them are disc florets, and for the chrysanthemum, which is Gokfa, the inflorescence, they're all ray florets. In this case, I do think this ray floret will have both anther and all the other reproductive structures because they need that for sexual reproduction. Okay, so as for archaea plants, I'm sorry if I butchered that name. There is the inflorescence is called the spadix, which is this fleshy stalk, and there's also something called the spathe. The spathe is the modified leaf, which is the bract. It's the same thing. Okay, so the spadix, the fleshy stalk, is protected by the spathe, and they have unisexual flowers. So this is this part. They have the male zone and the female zone. Those are the flowers. They do not have, or they have reduced sepals. All right, so in different regions, and then they may have sterile regions. So there's the appendix and the sterile zone. These are parts that do not have any or are not incapable of reproduction. All right, so now we'll talk about a bit of fruit, and this part is kind of hard to explain sometimes, so I'll try my best. So, a fruit is a matured carpel, this part, and the style of the ovaries and such. The ovules will become seeds, or will bear seeds, and the ovary wall will become pericarp, and these parts. The pericarp can just be the outermost layer that holds the seeds, or it could become the fruit. Um, they have if it becomes a fruit, it will become exocarp, mesocarp, and endocarp. So exocarp is kind of just the hard out shell, the outer shell of the seed. The mesocarp is the edible tissue that we usually eat, but obviously you can also eat exocarp as well sometimes. And endocarp is the part that is like the little chamber that holds the seed. I think it's kind of like here for the avocado, and for the cucumbers that part. These are also edible. The simple fruits they arise from one single flower with one ovary, but just remember, one ovary can hold many different ovules. So this means that this cucumber would have came from one flower, but the seeds all come from all the different ovules from the ovary. Okay, so for citrus fruits, it's a bit more complicated. You have the exocarp and the mesocarp, the exocarp being the outermost layer of the skin, and then the mesocarp being the small little layer right beneath the skin. And then you have the endocarp. You know how like oranges and lemon always have this fibrous material that are all around the like the pulp, like this part. So if the endocarp are there, it will go all around the entire pulp or the entire edible tissue, and each segment, so like this segment, they are the carpel, and the edible tissue is the pulp, which is juice-filled hair cells inside the carpel, and the seeds would be like somewhere here. But I think after human cultivation, lemons or oranges would already lost their seeds, but like taught what mandarin still has their seeds. Alright, anyways, so aside from like the ovary, the other parts could also become like part of the fruit, and in this case we'll talk about the apple. So the apple flower has the inferior ovary arrangement. That means the ovary is embedded into the hypanthium with no space surrounding it, and for the apple flesh actually is from the hypanthium. So the hypanthium here actually becomes the apple flesh, the ovules are the seeds, and the ovary actually becomes the apple core, which is the chamber that holds the seeds, and the rest are not super important, but you can take a look yourself. All right, so we will end here. We will finish at we'll finish at the apple, and to next video I will finish off this entire thing, and I will probably talk about the cocoon as well. Finally, we'll talk about the strawberry, which each little seed thing you see is actually a fruit. All right, I'll see you next time. Bye bye.